When a woman cheats, the first thing she says is often a reaction rooted in fear and an overwhelming instinct to protect herself. Denial is the first defense mechanism that kicks in, almost reflexively. It's not that she is necessarily trying to deceive you outright from the start, but she is protecting herself from the harsh consequences of her actions. The weight of guilt and shame that comes with infidelity can be so suffocating that the mind instinctively resists facing it head on. The shock of being caught, or even just being confronted with a suspicion, triggers a knee-jerk reaction, denying everything. A woman who is caught may immediately say something like, "I don't know what you're talking about," or "You're imagining things." These are statements that place the blame squarely on the accuser, suggesting that any concerns about her behavior are baseless or unfounded. Even if she knows the truth, deep down, her initial reaction is to avoid having to confront it. The denial serves as a protective barrier to stave off the intense emotions she might otherwise have to face: guilt, shame, and possibly even the fear of losing everything. The instinct to deny is especially strong when the person involved doesn't feel ready to address the reality of the situation. It's often easier to pretend that nothing has happened and hope that it all just goes away rather than facing the uncomfortable truth. The act of denial could be as simple as claiming you're being paranoid or that's not what happened, even in the face of compelling evidence. For her, the confrontation is too overwhelming, and pretending like the problem doesn't exist gives her a temporary sense of control over the situation. This denial is not just a defense mechanism against the accusation, but also against the emotions that come with confronting what she has done. The first thing she says may not be an outright lie, but rather a reflection of her own internal struggle. She is, in a sense, avoiding the inevitable fallout by refusing to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. If she denies it hard enough, she may even start to believe her own words. It's the mind's way of softening the blow, protecting itself from the crushing reality of her actions. In some cases, this denial is so intense that it becomes a persistent pattern. Even when faced with undeniable proof, a text message, a phone record, or even direct testimony from the person she cheated with, she may continue to insist that it's not true. "You don't have all the facts," or "that's not what really happened," are often the types of responses that follow when confronted with indisputable evidence. For her, accepting the truth is too painful, so she clings to the hope that if she denies it long enough, the situation will resolve itself without having to deal with the emotions that follow such a revelation. What is particularly interesting about the denial phase is that it's not necessarily an indication of a lack of remorse. She might feel deeply guilty, but the idea of confronting that guilt immediately feels too overwhelming. Denial, in this case, is more about self-preservation than evasion of responsibility. It's as if she is hoping that if she can delay facing the consequences, she might be able to hold on to her relationships with status quo without having to undergo the painful reckoning that comes with infidelity. Another layer to this denial is the complex mix of emotions that may be at play. Many women may deny their actions because they fear how they will be perceived once the truth comes out. The stigma of being labeled a cheater, a liar, or a betrayer is a heavy burden to bear, especially in a world that often places so much emphasis on fidelity and loyalty in relationships. This fear of judgment can make the denial feel even more urgent, as if by denying it, she is momentarily removing the potential shame that will follow once the truth is revealed. In some cases, denial can be a way to avoid confronting the other emotions that might be brought to the surface, like sadness, anger, or regret. For many women, infidelity is not just about the act itself, but also about the complex emotions that led up to it and the feelings it triggers afterward. Denying what happened allows her to maintain some control over how the situation unfolds, even if it's only temporary. The fear of having to fully acknowledge the damage to the relationship, or worse, face the possibility that the relationship may end because of her actions, becomes too much to bear. So when a woman cheats, the first thing she might say is, "I don't know what you're talking about," or "You're imagining things." Not because she is trying to deceive you, but because the denial is an essential first step in managing the intense emotions that come with the situation. It's a protective instinct, one that helps her shield herself from the overwhelming weight of guilt and the potential consequences of her actions. Over time, however, as the truth starts to sink in, the denial may fade, and what follows could be a much more complicated and painful reckoning. When a woman cheats, one of the first things she may say is often an attempt to deflect the blame and shift responsibility. This can be one of the most common and immediate responses, and it serves as another protective mechanism, not just for herself, but for her ego and emotional well-being. In a moment where she is confronted with her infidelity, shifting the blame allows her to escape the full emotional burden of guilt and prevents her from facing the harsh reality of what her actions might mean for the relationship. The act of turning the tables may be an instinctive reaction, a way to avoid being viewed as the sole culprit in the situation, and it often manifests as a way to manipulate the conversation and deflect attention away from her wrongdoing. It is one of the most typical things a woman might say in this instance is, "If you trusted me more, you wouldn't even think that." This comment, while it may initially seem unrelated to the issue at hand, is a subtle tactic to make the accuser question their own actions, feelings, or behavior. It places the blame on the partner for either being too paranoid, insecure, or lacking trust, which implies that the infidelity is not really the woman's fault, but rather the result of her partner's shortcomings. This type of statement serves to weaken the focus on her betrayal and instead subtly paints her as the victim of a partner's distrust. It allows her to avoid taking responsibility for her actions by portraying herself as someone who is simply responding to the other person's lack of faith or emotional shortcomings. In many cases, this shifting of blame can escalate into a larger, more defensive response. For example, she may argue that the relationship was already on the rocks and that her actions were just a result of the circumstances. "We weren't connecting anymore," or "you haven't been paying attention to me," might follow as part of this defensive stance. In this narrative, the woman positions herself as someone who was emotionally abandoned or neglected, making it easier for her to justify her infidelity. By shifting the blame onto the lack of attention or emotional fulfillment from the other partner, she avoids taking full responsibility for her actions, and instead directs the focus onto her partner's perceived failings. This allows her to justify the affair as an emotional response to unmet needs, rather than an act of betrayal driven by her own choices. So, another way that blame shifting can manifest is through minimizing the impact of her behavior, either by downplaying the significance of the affair or framing it as an isolated incident. She might say, "It wasn't like I was looking for this to happen," or "it didn't mean anything," trying to make it seem like the affair was an accident or an insignificant mistake. This attempt to downplay the situation is often a way to make it easier for her to cope with the shame of the infidelity. By denying the emotional or physical importance of the affair, she can convince herself and others that the relationship wasn't damaged in any substantial way. This serves as a means of keeping the situation from spiraling into a bigger issue that may threaten the stability of the relationship. There are also instances where the blame shifting may come across as an attack on the partner's emotional state or overall behavior, even if it's unrelated to the affair itself. Statements such as, "You never listen to me," or "You're always too busy," are common responses that redirect the conversation to the partner's perceived flaws. These comments shift the dynamic away from the infidelity and towards the partner's actions or personality traits, making the discussion less about the betrayal and more about the supposed issues within the relationship. This approach not only shifts blame, but also manipulates the conversation, making it seem like the affair is a consequence of the partner's actions rather than her own poor decisions. What is particularly challenging about this form of blame shifting is that it can make the partner second guess themselves. By shifting responsibility for the affair onto the other person's behavior or emotions, the woman might create an environment where the partner feels guilty for having questioned her in the first place. The focus is redirected away from the betrayal and towards the partner's alleged mistakes, making it easier for her to avoid the emotional consequences of her actions. In some cases, this blame shifting can erode trust even further and create a toxic cycle where the partner ends up apologizing or feeling responsible for the affair, despite being the one wronged. But once time is really one of boundless possibilities. While this tactic may serve as an immediate response to deflect the blame and protect the cheater, it is ultimately a destructive approach. Instead of acknowledging the real problem, the infidelity, it creates a cloud of confusion and misdirection that makes it harder for both parties to address the issue head-on. This form of emotional manipulation can damage the relationship further by fostering resentment, mistrust, and an inability to heal. While it may provide a temporary sense of relief for the one who cheated, The long-term consequences of blame shifting can be devastating for both individuals involved. Ultimately, the shifting of blame is a way for the woman to avoid facing the full weight of her actions. Rather than owning the responsibility for the betrayal, she seeks to diminish the situation by placing the fault on external factors or the partner's perceived flaws. This response, though an understandable defense mechanism, can complicate the process of healing, as it does little to address the true nature of the betrayal at hand. Time, the truth must come to light, and only by confronting it head-on can there be any hope for resolution. When a woman is confronted about her infidelity, one of the first things she might do is attempt to minimize the situation, often in an effort to downplay the severity of her actions. This tendency to make light of the betrayal serves as a protective mechanism to reduce the emotional weight of the situation and avoid fully acknowledging the harm she has caused. By minimizing the infidelity, she can temporarily distance herself from the guilt and shame that comes with such a significant betrayal. It allows her to avoid confronting the emotional consequences of her actions while keeping the situation from spiraling into a more painful confrontation. One of the ways this minimization manifests is through statements like, "It's not a big deal," or "It didn't mean anything." These phrases are typically meant to diminish the emotional or physical impact of the affair. The goal here is to make the betrayal seem less significant, almost as though it were inconsequential or unimportant. By doing so, the woman can deflect the seriousness of the situation, not only to her partner, but also to herself. She might tell herself that the affair was just a fleeting mistake or an impulse that has no real bearing on the relationship. The minimization of the affair becomes a way of rationalizing her actions, allowing her to avoid the full emotional burden of what she's done. This form of minimization is also a way to prevent the confrontation from escalating. By downplaying the affair, she may hope to diffuse the tension in the conversation and avoid a deeper exploration of her motivations, feelings, and the damage she's caused. For example, she might say something like, "It was just one time," as though the singularity of the event makes it less harmful. The repetition of such phrases can serve to desensitize the other person, making them feel that the betrayal is something that can be easily forgiven or moved past without needing to dwell on the details. Another reason why minimization occurs is that for many people, acknowledging the full extent of their actions is too emotionally taxing. Infidelity brings with it an avalanche of painful emotions: guilt, shame, and fear of the potential end of the relationship. Rather than confronting these overwhelming feelings head-on, the woman may attempt to make the situation feel smaller or more manageable by diminishing the affair. If the affair didn't mean anything or wasn't a big deal, then she doesn't have to reckon with the full emotional devastation that comes with betraying someone she claims to love. It's a defense mechanism that helps her avoid feeling the intensity of the guilt and sadness that would otherwise arise from taking full responsibility for her actions. Minimizing the infidelity can also serve as a way to protect the relationship, even if unconsciously. When a woman downplays her actions, she might do so because she's not ready to lose the relationship or face the reality of what her affair could mean for her future. By making the affair seem less serious, she hopes to convince her partner that they can move past it, that the relationship is still salvageable. And finally, that leads to a second barrier, one of the most important, which is the untruth that minimizing the affair was actually about. She might say, "We've been through worse," or "This doesn't change how I feel about you," as a way of reassuring her partner that the betrayal doesn't alter the foundation of their relationship. This minimization is meant to soften the blow and reduce the likelihood of a breakup, even though the damage done may be far deeper than she is willing to admit. Additionally, minimizing the affair can be a way of attempting to regain control of the situation. Infidelity often leaves both partners feeling vulnerable and powerless. By downplaying the seriousness of the affair, the woman attempts to regain a sense of control over the narrative. If she can convince her partner that the affair was minor or unimportant, she might feel she can regain their trust or avoid the painful fallout that typically follows infidelity. This can also be a tactic to avoid the uncomfortable emotional confrontation that comes with admitting the full extent of her betrayal. Rather than dealing with the fallout, she may hope that by minimizing the situation, the conversation will shift and things will somehow return to normal. Minimizing an affair can also be a way for the woman to preserve her own sense of self-esteem. Acknowledging the betrayal in full can lead to feelings of self-loathing or a sense of failure, both as a partner and as an individual. By making the affair seem less important, she can avoid confronting her own guilt and disappointment with herself. It's easier to frame the affair as something insignificant rather than deal with the much harder truth that she has broken someone's trust and harmed the relationship. However, the harm in minimizing an affair is clear. The longer the betrayal is downplayed or ignored, the harder it becomes to address the deeper issues at play. Infidelity is rarely just about the act itself. It's often a symptom of larger problems within the relationship, personal dissatisfaction, or unmet emotional needs. Minimizing the situation prevents these issues from coming to light and makes genuine healing more difficult. If the affair is trivialized, both partners are left without the opportunity to understand the root causes of the betrayal and find a path toward real resolution. Ultimately, the minimization of the affair is a way to avoid dealing with the full weight of the situation. While it may serve as a temporary coping mechanism for the woman, it only prolongs the healing process for both parties involved. For true healing to occur, there must be an honest acknowledgement of what happened, why it happened, and what steps need to be taken to rebuild trust and emotional connection. When a woman cheats, one of the most complex and emotionally charged reactions she may have is the use of emotional manipulation. This often comes in the form of guilt tripping or playing the victim, and it can be a powerful tool to divert attention away from her betrayal and shift the focus to her partner's perceived failures or inadequacies. By doing this, she can elicit sympathy or a sense of responsibility from her partner, making it more difficult for them to process their own feelings of hurt and anger. Instead of addressing the infidelity directly, she might manipulate the emotional tone of the conversation, making it harder for both parties to confront the real issue at hand. The more she manipulates what's going on, the more tension they begin to build up. One common tactic is for the woman to present herself as the one who is wronged or emotionally hurt, despite being the one who cheated. She might say things like, "How could you do this to me? I can't believe you don't trust me," or "I never wanted this to happen." These statements flip the script, placing the emotional burden on her partner rather than herself. By positioning herself as the victim, she makes it more difficult for her partner to confront the betrayal because their attention is redirected towards comforting her or making her feel better. It's a form of emotional deflection that shifts the focus away from her actions and onto her partner's reactions. In some cases, the manipulation becomes even more intense, as the woman may use guilt to make her partner feel responsible for her infidelity. She might say, "If you had been there for me, none of this would have happened," or "You know how much I've been struggling and you didn't notice." By blaming her partner for not fulfilling her emotional needs, she attempts to justify her actions and make them seem like an inevitable consequence of the relationship's shortcomings. This emotional manipulation can be especially damaging because it makes the partner feel as if they somehow caused the affair, thus placing the weight of the situation on their shoulders. This tactic of guilt tripping can be particularly effective because it taps into the natural desire for most people to avoid conflict and pain. The partner may feel guilty for not noticing the signs of dissatisfaction or for not providing enough attention, even though the affair is entirely the responsibility of the one who cheated. In this way, the woman uses her partner's empathy and sense of responsibility against them, further complicating the emotional landscape of the relationship. The guilt that she elicits may make it harder for her partner to focus on the real issue, the betrayal, and instead they may find themselves apologizing for things they didn't even do, trying to fix problems they weren't aware existed. This emotional manipulation can also be a way to delay any serious confrontation or consequences. When a woman uses guilt or plays the victim, she might be trying to buy herself time to figure out how to handle the situation or to avoid facing the fallout of her actions. The longer the partner is caught up in the emotional manipulation, the more she can avoid taking full responsibility for her betrayal. Right. By eliciting feelings of guilt or sympathy, she diverts attention from her actions, giving herself time to cool down or reframe the situation before confronting the reality of what has occurred. In some cases, this manipulation extends to the idea of self-sacrifice, where the woman may claim that she is the one who is truly suffering as a result of her own behavior. She may say things like, "I don't even know how I'm going to live with myself after this," or "I hate myself for what I did." While these statements may seem like expressions of remorse, they are often just another form of manipulation designed to garner sympathy and to deflect the focus from the partner's pain. This creates an emotionally complex situation where the partner feels compelled to console the woman, thus further diminishing the space needed for them to process their own feelings. This tactic often leads to a toxic cycle in the relationship where both partners are caught in a loop of guilt, blame, and unresolved emotions. Instead of confronting the infidelity head on, they become trapped in a cycle of emotional manipulation where the cheater's feelings and excuses take precedence over the betrayed partner's hurt and anger. The result is a lack of honest communication, making it harder to resolve the underlying issues and to rebuild trust. Moreover, guilt tripping and playing the victim can have a long-term impact on the relationship. Over time, it may cause the betrayed partner to lose sight of their own feelings and needs, as they become consumed by the emotional manipulation. It can erode their sense of self-worth and lead them to question their own role in the relationship, even if they were not at fault. This emotional toll can create lasting damage, making it even harder for the relationship to recover from the infidelity. Ultimately, when a woman cheats and resorts to emotional manipulation, she is not only avoiding responsibility for her actions, but also complicating the healing process. Instead of focusing on rebuilding trust and addressing the damage caused by the affair, both partners are caught in a web of guilt, shame, and deflection. While the manipulative behavior may provide short-term relief or avoidance, it only prolongs the emotional turmoil and makes genuine resolution that much more difficult to achieve. True healing can only begin when both partners are able to face the reality of the betrayal and work together to rebuild what was broken. Is caught cheating, one of the most common responses she may give is to evade the details of the situation. This tactic of avoidance often comes in the form of not directly addressing the questions being asked, steering the conversation away from specifics, or even outright refusing to engage with the uncomfortable reality of what has occurred. The avoidance of details serves as a way to delay the inevitable confrontation and to keep the full emotional impact of the affair at bay for just a little longer. In the heat of the moment, it can be easier for the woman to deflect or dodge the direct questions posed to her, hoping that the situation will somehow diffuse or resolve itself without having to get into the specifics. One of the first things that may happen when a woman is confronted about her infidelity is that she will try to change the subject. Rather than answering the questions about what happened, who was involved, or how it transpired, she may steer the conversation toward unrelated topics. "Why are you asking me about that now? Or can we talk about something else?" might be phrases she uses to redirect attention away from the affair itself. This tactic allows her to avoid discussing the emotional complexities and the details of the situation, which are often too painful or overwhelming for her to confront. By shifting the focus to another subject, she is temporarily avoiding the deeper emotional truths that the confrontation would bring to light. Another way that avoidance plays out is through the refusal to directly answer questions. A woman caught in an affair may be asked direct, pointed questions such as, "When did it happen?" or "How many times did this occur?" Instead of providing clear answers, she may respond with vague or non-committal statements like, "I don't remember," or "It doesn't matter." By evading specific details, she can maintain a sense of control over the narrative, preventing the conversation from delving deeper into the facts of the affair. This response allows her to maintain some distance from the truth, creating a barrier between herself and the full emotional consequences of her actions. Even if she is not denying the affair outright, her refusal to engage with the details of it further complicates the situation, leaving the partner with more questions than answers. In some instances, she may avoid the confrontation altogether by becoming defensive or angry. When faced with questions she doesn't want to answer, the woman may shift into a defensive mode, attacking the person asking the questions rather than addressing the issue. "Why are you questioning me like this?" Or "You don't trust me, so why should I even explain myself?" are common responses designed to redirect the conversation away from the affair and onto the perceived accusations or mistrust of the partner. By doing this, she is not only avoiding the details of the affair, but also attempting to make the accuser feel guilty for raising the issue in the first place. This deflection tactic helps her avoid the specifics of the situation and shift the emotional focus away from her actions and onto the partner's perceived flaws or suspicions. At times, this refusal to engage with the details can take on a more passive form. She might avoid directly answering questions by saying something like, I don't want to talk about this right now, or I'm too tired to have this conversation. This passive avoidance can be just as frustrating and damaging as outright denial because it prevents any real resolution or progress in the discussion. The partner is left feeling as though they are being dismissed or invalidated, as though their feelings don't warrant an honest, open conversation. The refusal to engage in the specifics also prevents any real understanding of the motives behind the affair, making it much harder for both parties to work through the emotional aftermath. In some cases, a woman might avoid discussing the details of the affair because she is not yet ready to face the consequences of her actions. Admitting the full scope of what has happened, the when, the how, and the why would require her to confront the depth of her betrayal and the emotional damage it has caused. By avoiding these details, she can maintain a sense of control over her emotions and the situation at large. This avoidance might be an attempt to delay the inevitable fallout and buy time to process the guilt, shame, or fear of what lies ahead. It also gives her more time to figure out how to salvage the relationship, if she even wants to, without having to address the specifics of the affair head on. The avoidance of details can also be seen as a way of minimizing the affair's impact on both her and her partner. By withholding information or evading questions, she may try to downplay the significance of the betrayal, making it seem like something that doesn't need to be fully explored or understood. In doing so, she might hope that by leaving the details unclear, the relationship can heal more quickly, or without as much emotional disruption. The longer she can avoid delving into the specifics of what happened, the easier it might be for her to imagine that the situation will simply go away, or that the relationship will be able to recover without needing to confront the reality of the affair. However, this avoidance strategy ultimately only complicates the healing process. It prevents both partners from addressing the true nature of the betrayal and slows down the process of understanding why the affair happened in the first place. Without fully exploring the details, it becomes difficult to rebuild trust, work through the underlying issues in the relationship, and begin to heal emotionally. The partner who has been betrayed is left with lingering questions and a sense of confusion, making it even harder for them to move forward and come to terms with what has occurred. Ultimately, avoiding the details of the affair may provide temporary relief for the woman who cheated, but it only prolongs the pain for both parties involved. Only by facing the truth and addressing the specifics of the situation can the couple hope to find a path toward healing and resolution. When a woman cheats, one of the most difficult things to hear is when she attempts to justify her actions, often presenting the affair as a result of external factors or emotional needs that were unmet within the relationship. This justification can take many forms, but the core idea is the same. The affair wasn't entirely her fault, but rather the result of circumstances beyond her control. By offering explanations, she tries to rationalize her behavior in a way that minimizes her personal responsibility, shifting the focus away from her choices and instead pointing to external influences that made the affair seem inevitable or understandable. Really? One common way she might justify the affair is by claiming that she wasn't getting enough emotional support or attention from her partner. She might say something like, "You stopped paying attention to me," or "You weren't there when I needed you." These statements suggest that the affair was a response to feeling neglected or undervalued. In this justification, she presents herself as someone who was simply seeking out the affection, care, or emotional connection that was missing from the relationship. By framing the affair in this way, she hopes to make it seem like a natural response to a partner's failure to meet her needs, rather than an active choice to betray trust. Another variation of this justification involves placing the blame on the relationship itself, rather than her behavior. She might say things like, "We've been growing apart for years," or "Our relationship was already over before I did this." In these instances, she is trying to paint the affair as a consequence of an inevitable breakdown in the relationship, something that was going to happen anyway. In particular, this defense minimizes the agency she had in choosing to cheat and suggests that the affair was simply the result of a relationship that was already doomed. By presenting her actions this way, she avoids taking full responsibility for the betrayal and instead attempts to make it appear as if the relationship's problems left her with no other option. There are also cases where a woman might justify her actions by claiming that she was simply looking for something more. She might say, I was just trying to find out who I am, or I was feeling lost and didn't know how to deal with it. In this scenario, she portrays the affair as a journey of self-discovery or an emotional experiment, rather than acknowledging it as an intentional betrayal. By justifying the affair as a means of personal growth or exploration, she distances herself from the reality of her actions and frames them as something that was necessary or even understandable given her state of mind at the time. Some women may also try to justify the affair by claiming that it wasn't intentional or planned. She might say, it just happened, or I wasn't looking for it, but it just sort of fell into my lap. In this justification, she is attempting to minimize the calculated nature of the affair and downplay the fact that it involved conscious decisions such as lying, hiding things, and maintaining secrecy. By framing it as something that just happened, she shifts the narrative to make it seem less premeditated and therefore less harmful, essentially removing the element of personal choice from the equation. In addition to these justifications, a woman who cheats might also attempt to deflect blame by bringing up past grievances or mistakes in the relationship. You've hurt me too, or I never did anything wrong, but you always treated me like this, are statements that attempt to position the affair as a kind of payback or revenge for the wrongs that were committed by the partner. In this way, the infidelity becomes a response to what she perceives as past emotional or relational injustices, making it easier for her to justify her actions as a way of leveling the playing field or getting back at her partner. This approach effectively shifts the focus from the affair itself to past issues in the relationship, making it seem like the affair was an inevitable reaction rather than a betrayal of trust. While these justifications may feel like attempts to explain or make sense of her actions, they often have the opposite effect. Rather than helping the relationship heal, they further complicate things by creating an atmosphere of blame and shifting responsibility. The partner who has been cheated on is left feeling as though their needs and feelings are being ignored in favor of rationalizations that ultimately serve to protect the cheater from facing the full consequences of their actions. These justifications also prevent any real accountability from being taken and make it more difficult for the couple to move forward or rebuild trust. Furthermore, these justifications can be a sign of a deeper emotional issue within the woman herself. Rather than confronting the root causes of her infidelity, such as a lack of emotional maturity, poor communication, or a disregard for the emotional well-being of her partner, she deflects responsibility and tries to place the blame on external factors. This avoidance of accountability makes it more difficult for her to reflect on her own behavior and understand why she made the choices she did. Without this level of self-awareness, it becomes challenging for her to make the necessary changes to prevent future infidelity. In the end, justifying the affair serves as a way for the woman to avoid facing the full impact of her actions. It provides a shield from guilt and allows her to sidestep personal responsibility, but it ultimately does more harm than good. Instead of fostering open communication and healing, these justifications only add more layers of defensiveness and misdirection to the already painful process of confronting betrayal. Acknowledging the affair for what it truly is, a violation of trust, is the first step toward genuine understanding and resolution.